Hey there. Tonight we are going back to Victorian London, a city where a married lady could share her bed all winter with her dearest friend while her husband slept down the corridor and wished them both a very good night, where women posted each other letters through the Royal Mail that opened with "My own darling wife," and where the most famous actress in the English-speaking world put on breeches, played Romeo on the London stage, and made love to Juliet by lamplight in front of a cheering house. And not one law in England, not one constable, and not one court in the land could touch a single bit of it, because the entire age had quietly agreed that whatever two ladies might be to each other, it did not officially exist. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and leave a comment telling me where in the world you are listening from and what time it is there. Somehow, it is always 2 a.m. somewhere. Now, dim the lights. Put on a fan if you like that soft wash of white noise. Pull the blankets up around your shoulders and let the day fall away. Because tonight the curtains are drawn, the letters are locked in their drawer, and for the next 2 hours nobody at all is reading over your shoulder. Have you ever wondered why the strictest chaperone system ever devised, which would not leave a lady alone in a room with a gentleman for 15 minutes, would cheerfully wave 2 ladies off on a 6-week tour of Italy with 1 hotel room and 1 bed between them? Why Parliament, in the very act of writing love between men into the criminal law, never once, in the entire debate, so much as mentioned women? How 2 Edinburgh schoolmistresses, accused in court of the unthinkable, were rescued by a judge who ruled that the thing they were accused of did not exist. Why the King of England granted a royal pension to 2 Irish ladies who had run away together in the night, one of them in men's clothes with a pistol in her hand, to set up house in a Welsh cottage. Why so many respectable New England households were made up of exactly 2 unmarried ladies that the arrangement earned its own name, a name people would still be using a century later. And the strangest question of all, in a black and white timbered hall outside Halifax, there sits a diary of 5 million words. 1 word in every 6 written in a private cipher of Greek letters and algebra. And when a Victorian gentleman finally cracked that code, in the 1890s, what did he read there that made his friend beg him to burn every volume, and why did he choose instead to hide them behind a panel in the wall? And now, congratulations! You have just woken up in the front bedroom of a tall white house near the museums in South Kensington, London, on a Friday morning in April 1886. You are 29 years old, your name is Constance, and you have been married for 7 years to a kind, busy, entirely unremarkable man named Henry, who is at this moment 2 miles away in Bayswater, eating his egg and reading about the trouble in the Sudan, because you are not at home. You are at Kitty's. Kitty is a widow of 31. She is the dearest friend you have in all the world. She is still asleep on the pillow beside you with 1 arm thrown over the coverlet, and the first thing you need to understand about the night you have just spent is that it is the single most respectable thing you have done all week. Listen to the house a moment, because the house is the whole story in miniature. Below you, Kitty's maid Hannah is raking the kitchen grate. In an hour she will knock and enter and find her widowed mistress and her mistress's married friend asleep in 1 bed, and she will set down a tray with 2 cups of chocolate on it and open the curtains on the wet April street and think absolutely nothing at all, because there is nothing in the entire filing system of her world to think. Ladies share beds. Ladies have always shared beds. Sisters share them. School friends share them. Great friends share them, for warmth and for company, and for the pleasure of talking in the dark. And a married lady spending a fortnight with her widowed friend while her husband dines at his club is not an arrangement anyone needs to explain. It is the explanation. Dearest friend is a complete sentence in your world, Constance. It answers every question before the question can form, and here is the fact this whole night rests on. So let us set it down plainly while the chocolate is still coming up the stairs. What you and Kitty are to each other in the plain words of a later century, is an affair. It has the jealousy, the anniversaries, the letters, the cost, and in the plain words of your own century, it is a beautiful friendship, and the entire strange mercy of your position is that your century wrote its dictionary first and left your page blank. The future will call this invisibility and mean it as a wound, and it will be right. But it is April, and the fire is caught, and Kitty is waking up. And this morning invisibility feels like the roomiest coat in London. And tonight, before we are done, we are going to weigh the coat honestly, pockets and all. To understand how you got here, you have to go back to school, because your century does not merely permit what you and Kitty have. It trains girls for it, on purpose, with a straight face, and then stands amazed at its own results. You were 14 at Miss Marchmont's establishment for young ladies in Brighton when you fell in love for the first time, and nobody called it that, and everybody knew exactly what it was. The school called it a rave. Other schools said a pash, or a crush, or simply that a girl was devoted. And the machinery was as formal as a court presentation. You chose an older girl, or she chose you, and in your case she was called Louisa, and she was 16, and she could do the whole of a French verb without looking down. And you carried her books, and warmed her side of the window seat, and saved her the crusts you both liked, and wrote her notes of a temperature that would take the varnish off a door, and when she smiled at you across the dining hall, your whole week stood up and shook itself like a dog coming out of a river, and the mistresses looked on and approved. Constance, that is the part to hold on to. A girl with a rave was considered to be coming along nicely. The moralists of your age wrote, in published books, with their names on the spine, that these attachments were the rehearsal for the great attachment, that a girl practiced her heart on her friend, the way she practiced her scales, so that both would be ready for the concert of marriage. Loving Louisa was not a deviation from your education. It was the curriculum. And when you left school, you and Louisa exchanged lockets with hair inside, and swore an eternal correspondence, and kept it up for 6 years, and the last letter she sent before her wedding you still have. In the drawer we will come to at the end of the night, and if the age had ever once stopped to ask itself what exactly it thought it was rehearsing, this would be a very different episode. It never asked. That is the whole of Act 1, because the rave was only the junior branch of a great national institution, and the institution had a name your century said out loud with pride, in sermons, in novels, in memorial inscriptions: romantic friendship. A woman's passionate love for another woman was not a secret vice in your world, Constance. It was a public virtue. It was praised from pulpits as the purest form of human affection, love with no appetite in it, the soul holding hands with itself, and the fashionable proofs of it were everywhere. Friends who dressed alike, friends who kept the anniversary of their first meeting the way spouses kept wedding days, friends buried, at their own written instruction, in one grave, under one stone. Your grandmother's generation had it, and your mother's, and yours has it still. And here is the delicious historical joke running underneath it all. The men used to have it too, go back a century. And gentlemen wept on each other's necks and shared beds at inns, and wrote each other letters of flaming devotion, and thought nothing of it. But somewhere in your grandfather's lifetime, the law and the newspapers began to look very hard at what men might be to each other, and male friendship put on a stiff collar and a firm handshake and backed slowly away from itself, terrified of being misread, until by your own decade an Englishman's deepest feeling for his friend was a clap on the shoulder and the word "old fellow" repeated as needed. The women were never looked at, and so the women never flinched. Female friendship kept every one of its old warm liberties, the endearments, the kisses, the shared pillow, the eternal vows, and carried them straight through the century in plain sight, which means, and this is the load-bearing beam of the whole night, that the very same behaviour your age reads as innocence in women, it reads as danger in men. Same letters, same bed, same vows. The difference is not in the acts. The difference is entirely in who the watchers believe capable of wanting, and nobody official, believes it of you. Hold that beam, Constance. Every room we walk through tonight is hanging off it. And once you know the beam is there, you start to see the licenses written into the ordinary rules of touch, and they are everywhere. And they are astonishing. Consider, and I mean really consider, what you and Kitty may do in public this afternoon in front of everyone. You may walk the length of Kensington arm in arm, pressed close against the wind. You may hold hands. You may greet each other, parting and meeting, with a kiss in a crowded drawing room before the assembled eyes of society, and the assembled eyes will find it charming. At a country ball where the gentlemen run short, you may waltz together, her hand at your waist, turning and turning under the chandeliers, while the chaperones along the walls smile over their fans at the pretty economy of it. And when the visit runs late and the roads are dark, you may simply stay, and there will be one candle and one bed, and nobody will so much as pause on the landing. Now set that against the rules we have spent whole episodes of this channel learning. A lady and a gentleman who did 1/10 of that list are ruined, both of them, before the second waltz. A lady may not be alone with a man in a room with the door shut for a quarter of an hour, but she may be alone with a woman in a locked bedroom for the whole of a winter. The strictest surveillance system ever trained on human beings. The chaperones. The card trays. The 15-minute rules. The whole apparatus your poor friend Clara sweated under 11 years ago, just across the park. All of it watches one thing only, which is women near men. Your age built a fortress with 1,000 guarded doors, Constance, and then left one door not merely unlocked but propped cheerfully open with a lamp lit beside it, because it could not conceive of anyone wanting to go through. You and Kitty live on the far side of that door. Tonight is about everybody else who found it too, and do not imagine the church, at least, was standing guard where the chaperones were not, because the church, bless it, was holding the door widest of all. The sermons of your age praise female friendship without reserve as the purest schoolroom of the Christian heart, charity rehearsed at close range, and when the vicar of your parish beams across the aisle at you and Kitty in your shared pew, he is not overlooking your devotion, Constance. He is citing it, and he has Scripture on his side, better Scripture than he knows, because the tenderest speech of devotion in the whole Bible, the one every girl of your generation stitched onto samplers and copied into albums, is spoken by one woman to another. Entreat me not to leave thee, Ruth says to Naomi, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and where thou diest, will I die, and there will I be buried. 2 widows, Constance, one clinging to the other against all sense and every family arrangement, vowing one road, one roof, one grave, and your century, which reads its Bible harder than any century before or since, has made that passage a favourite at weddings, spoken over brides and grooms as the very pattern of what marriage ought to be, and has never once, in all its millions of pew hours, paused on the plain fact of who is speaking to whom. The men used to have their text too, David and Jonathan, a love passing the love of women. But the men's text has grown warm to the touch lately, handled carefully, preached briefly, for the same reason male friendship bought its stiff collar. Ruth and Naomi remain entirely safe, quoted everywhere, embroidered everywhere. And so it comes about that when you and Kitty are old, if some kind soul carves a line of Scripture over the pair of you, the age will have supplied, from its own holiest book, in its own approved translation, the exact words, and will stand at the graveside believing, to a mourner, that whither thou goest is a remark about friendship. The fortress tonight has walls of law and walls of science, Constance, but its chapel was consecrated long before either, and the age worships in it weekly, and has never once read the inscription over its own door. So who left the door open? And why? And the answer begins, as so many of the age's strangest answers do, with the doctors. In 1857, a celebrated London physician named William Acton published a fat and respectable book on the workings of the human body, and in it he set down, as settled science, the doctrine your entire era runs on, that the majority of women, happily for them, are not much troubled by passionate feeling of any kind. Happily for them, a woman, in the official medical picture, is a creature of affection, but not of appetite. She loves her husband, her children, her home and her God, and desire, actual desire, is a thing that happens to her at most faintly, dutifully, and, in response to a man, the way a bell responds to being struck and not otherwise. Now, you and I both know, and half the age privately knew, that this is nonsense, and there were doctors and wives on record politely disagreeing even then. But it was the official map, taught, printed, repeated, and official maps decide what officials can see. Because follow the doctrine one step, Constance, just one, and watch what it builds. If a woman's desire can only ever be an answer to a man, then where no man is present, no desire can be present. Two women alone together are, by definition, by medical definition, two creatures at rest. Whatever warmth passes between them must be the pure, sexless warmth of friendship, because the alternative is not wicked, it is impossible. The way a fire in a sealed jar is impossible. The strictest moral age in modern history policed what it believed in, and it believed in men. It never posted a guard on your door, my dear, because its own scientists had certified that behind your door there was nothing to guard. The chaperone watches the lock. The doctor threw away the idea of the key, and what medicine declared impossible, the law never even troubled to name. And this is the part of tonight you may find genuinely hard to believe. So let us take it slowly, with dates. For 3.5 centuries, since the reign of Henry VIII, England has had a law against physical love between men, and it has been a terrible law. At first a hanging matter, softened in 1861 in the modern spirit to mere imprisonment for life. And in all those 3.5 centuries, in all those parliaments, in all that ink, the law of England has never once, not in a single statute, named love between women. Not to punish it, not to forgive it, not to define it, nothing. And this is not ancient history to you, Constance, it is this morning's news. Because just last summer, 8 months ago, Parliament sat late into an August night over a great bill on the protection of women and girls, and a member named Mr. Labouchere rose near midnight and slipped in a new clause almost without debate, and the clause made even private affection between men, anything the courts might call gross indecency, a crime worth 2 years' hard labour. It is the widest net ever thrown over the private lives of Englishmen, and it will catch, 9 years from tonight, the most famous playwright in London, and we will stand in the wreckage of that later. But notice, tonight, the shape of the net, amid all that midnight zeal, in a chamber of 600 men legislating for the private conduct of the whole nation, it occurred to nobody, not the reformers, not the Puritans, not Mr. Labouchere himself, to write one word about women. Not because anyone weighed it and decided mercy. It was simply unthinkable, in the exact sense that no one was capable of the thought, and the blankness runs deeper still, into the marriage law itself. If Henry, 2 miles away over his egg, somehow came to understand precisely what you and Kitty are, and took it hard, and went to a lawyer, here is what the lawyer would tell him. Nothing can be done. Adultery, in the law of England, means what a wife does with a man. It has to be possible to father a stranger's child into the bloodline. That is the ancient property logic underneath. And so, a wife's love for a woman, whatever its temperature, is not adultery, cannot be adultery, and is no more grounds for divorce than her fondness for the piano. The law of England can take a woman's property, her children, her vote, she never had, but it cannot see Kitty. There is no paper anywhere in the kingdom with a box on it for what you are. You are, legally speaking, a rumour the state refuses to hear. Which brings us, gently, to Henry, because you should not spend tonight thinking of Henry as a fool. And neither, to be fair, does the age give him much chance to be anything else. Henry is a good man of the middling kind. Wed to you 7 years. Fond of you in the steady way one is fond of a well-run house. And Henry does not merely tolerate Kitty. Henry is grateful for Kitty, and he would tell you so, warmly, over the roast. Before Kitty, you were, in his private vocabulary, difficult in the winters, low, restless, inclined to weep at nothing he could repair. Since Kitty, his wife is bright at breakfast, patient with his mother, full of conversation gathered from somewhere, and his evenings are his own. Because the two of you are at a lecture, or a gallery, or each other's firesides, and he may dine at his club with an entirely clear conscience. The marriage manuals of your century say it outright. A husband should encourage his wife's female friendships, for they steady her spirits and spare his patience, a wife's friend being, in the accepted phrase, a second self. And so the great alibi is not something you maintain against Henry. It is something Henry maintains for you. He franks the arrangement with his approval at every dinner party. My wife and Mrs. Ashby are quite inseparable, said with the small pride of a man whose household runs well, and every listening face softens because a devoted friendship reflects sweetly on everyone near it. Understand this precisely, Constance. Because it is the strangest joint in the whole machine, your affair is not conducted behind your husband's back. It is conducted through his blessing. In the open. Under the lamp, he holds up himself, and he believes with his whole decent heart that what he is blessing is a friendship, and here is the sentence to fall asleep on some other, braver night. He is not entirely wrong, and you love him a little for it. And that arithmetic, the true friendship and the true marriage and the true affair, all standing in the same room, wearing each other's coats, is a thing your century makes possible and no other century quite will. Now, the letters, because between your Tuesdays at Kitty's and her Fridays at yours, there flows a river of paper, and the river is the safest part of the whole country. In the middle of London, the post comes up to 12 times a day. 12. You can write to Kitty over breakfast, have her answer by early afternoon, reply to the answer before dressing, and hold her reply to the reply while your hair is being taken down for bed, and on strong days you do. And the two housemaids who carry the letters to the pillar box grow philosophical about it, because ladies are like that. And what may a lady write to her friend in this most guarded of centuries, where a single note passed to a bachelor is a legal instrument that can end in a courtroom? She may write anything. There is no convention to break, because the conventions of female correspondence were drawn up by and for romantic friendship, and they run hotter than most marriages. My own darling, my dearest own wife, I kissed your letter until the ink smeared. The bed is cold on your side of it. Come Thursday, or I shall not answer for myself. 10,000 kisses until then. Every one of those phrases, Constance, is standard issue. The ordinary registered vocabulary of devoted friends, used by bishops, daughters, and judges, wives, and so the most incriminating correspondence in England requires no cipher at all. Anne Lister, whom you will meet properly within the hour, wrote her secrets in Greek letters and algebra, but she was hiding them from her own family across the breakfast table. From the world at large no code was ever needed, because the world reads a love letter between women and files it, smiling, under sentiment. A man writing 1/10 of your Tuesday letter to another man is carrying his ruin in his coat pocket. You post yours unsealed if you like. Franked by the assumptions of the age, and the Royal Mail of Queen Victoria carries your passion through the rain 12 times a day, punctually, respectfully, and utterly unread. The most efficient accomplice a love affair ever had. And the letters are only the paper wing of a whole museum of permitted tokens, because your century is the great age of sentimental objects, and every one of its conventions works for you. Every February, the Valentine post swells into a national event, millions of lace-paper hearts moving through the mails, and a good share of them pass between women, verses of devotion chosen carefully at the stationers, and the age finds this nothing but charming girls and their friends, sentiment keeping its hand in. There are friendship albums on every parlour table, where your circle copies verses and paints little violets and signs itself yours until death. And there is the strangest and most Victorian genre of all, the jewellery made of hair. At your throat, this evening at Henry's table, on the gold chain Henry himself gave you at Christmas, there hangs a small locket, and inside the locket is a plaited coil of Kitty's brown hair. And Henry has seen it 100 times and thinks of it, when he thinks of it at all, as the sweetest sort of keepsake. Because it is. That is precisely what it is. Half the women at any dinner party are wearing somebody, a dead mother, a distant sister, a bosom friend. Love worked into wearable relics by professional hair workers with shops in Regent Street, and so the age has arranged matters, Constance, so that you may sit at your own husband's right hand wearing your beloved's body, publicly, as ornament, while the footman serves the fish. In the album in your morning room, Kitty's photograph, her carte de visite from the good studio in Baker Street, sits on the family page, facing your mother, at your own quiet insistence, and callers turn the pages and coo and see nothing, because an album is a catalogue of affection, and affection is exactly what you feel. That is the standing miracle of your position, and we keep arriving at it by different doors. You are not passing falsehoods through the world. Every token is labelled truthfully, love, devotion, my dearest friend, and the world reads every label, agrees with every word, and understands none of it. Your affair requires no forgeries, my dear. It runs entirely on the age's own stationery, and there is one license above all the others, the deepest in the whole cabinet, and last February you used it, and I want to take you back there, gently, because it is the closest your century ever comes to open acknowledgement. Kitty took the influenza, badly, in the cold snap, and the moment word reached Bayswater you had your boxes packed, and here is the marvel, every voice in your world commanded you to go, Henry insisted. Henry's mother, who approves of very little, sent round beef tea and her second-best hot water bottles and pronounced you a good soul, because nursing, Constance, is the sacred female duty, the one province where a woman's devotion is permitted to be total, and a sick friend has an absolute claim recognised by everyone from the vicar to the cook. So, for 3 weeks, you lived at Kitty's bedside, and the age not only allowed what followed, it prescribed it. The day and night attendance, the sponging of her forehead, the sleeping in her bed to be near if the fever turned, the spooned broth, the hairbrush, the hours of just sitting, her hand in both of yours, while the fire ticked, total intimacy, round the clock, under doctor's orders, with the full applause of both families, and when the fever broke at last, near dawn on the 9th day, and she knew you, and said your name, you put your head down on the coverlet beside her, and wept, and the nurse on the landing told the cook that Madam's friend had been an angel, which is the age's exact word for what you were being, and the age was not wrong, only incomplete. File this one where you keep the precious things, Constance. Your world would not let you claim Kitty in health, but it handed her to you bodily in sickness, and every couple in tonight's gallery knew that clause by heart, and when the last illnesses came, at the far ends of these stories, it was the friend, not the family, who was sent for, the friend who held the hand, the friend who closed the eyes, and not one deathbed in 100 was disturbed by anyone asking why. The age demanded that love between women be invisible, but it never quite managed to make it optional. And at the bedside, where it mattered most, the fog itself stood aside and let you through. The chocolate is long finished, and Kitty is at her writing desk in a dressing gown, and while she settles the day's small campaigns, look around you at the house itself, because the house is an institution too, and its founding charter is widowhood. Kitty married at 22, as instructed, a decent stockbroker of 41, and was widowed at 28. And your century, which is so hard on women in almost every posture, is strangely, accidentally generous to this one. A widow of means is the freest female creature in England. She has her own money at last, her own door, her own servants, answerable to nobody but herself, and she may receive whom she pleases, travel where she pleases, and sleep, at last, in the middle of the bed diagonally if the mood takes her. Nobody expects her to remarry quickly, and a quiet reluctance to remarry at all is read as devotion to the departed, which is convenient, because Kitty's devotion to the departed, a man she esteemed the way one esteems a reliable railway line, consists chiefly of gratitude for the house. And around such women the age has built one more respectable institution with a door in it, the companion. Up and down every terrace in Kensington, ladies alone keep a companion. Sometimes salaried, sometimes simply a friend come to stay, who somehow never leaves, and the arrangement is applauded on all sides as prudent, economical, and kind. 2 establishments folded into one, 2 lonelinesses cancelled, the proprieties satisfied, the coal bill halved. When Kitty's aunt asks, every Christmas, whether dear Constance might not one day simply come and live here, she believes she is proposing good household management. She is proposing your entire dream, out loud, over the mince pies, with Henry nodding thoughtfully into his port, and this is the deepest kindness of the blind spot, Constance, and also, as you will feel before morning, its quiet cruelty. The age will let 2 women build a whole life together, so long as it may go on believing the life is a thrift. And the thrift excuse has been getting steadily stronger all your life, Constance, for a reason your century discusses constantly, loudly, in Parliament and the quarterlies, without once noticing what it is licensing. And the reason is arithmetic. There are not enough men. The census takers discovered it at the middle of the century, and the discovery became a national sensation. England holds hundreds of thousands more women than men, the men being off dying in wars and colonies and merchant ships, or simply declining, in their comfortable clubs, to propose to anybody. And since your civilization has decreed that a woman's only career is marriage, it follows that a vast standing army of women can never be employed at all. The essayists have a name for them, and it is a name of genuine cruelty, spoken from podiums by serious men. The redundant women, surplus stock. One famous article proposed, in all earnestness, shipping the excess to the colonies by the boatload, where husbands were said to be plentiful, redistributing spinsters across the empire like grain, and societies were actually founded, Constance, with offices and subscriptions to assist the redundant female to emigrate toward matrimony. But here is what the panic built at home, while it wrung its hands. It normalized the unmarried woman. It made her ordinary, expected, above all numerous, a fixture in every family and every terrace, the maiden aunts, the daughters who stayed, the pairs of friends setting up their little households because, as everyone sighed, what else are they to do, poor things? There are simply no men for them. And so every couple in tonight's episode walks abroad wrapped in a statistic. When 2 ladies take a house together, the neighbourhood does not ask why they chose each other. It knows why. The newspapers have explained it 100 times. They were not chosen and are making the best of it. Companionship as consolation prize, and the neighbourhood is moved, briefly, and passes on. That some percentage of the redundant were not redundant at all, that scattered through that army were women who had refused good offers, quietly, deliberately, one after another, holding the door shut against husbands with the same steady hand the age assumed was wringing itself in despair. This occurs to nobody, because the arithmetic has already explained everything. Your century looked at 500,000 women living without men, my dear, and its one and only theory was scarcity. It never priced the possibility of preference, and the women of tonight's gallery banked in that blindness for 50 years, dressed, forever, in the national hard luck story, the least pitiable poor things in England. And if you want proof of how far that license stretches, you need only do what half of fashionable Europe did for 50 years, and make the pilgrimage to a small black and white house above a river in Wales. Everyone in your world knows the story of the ladies of Llangollen. Your grandmother told it to you like a fairy tale, and it goes like this. Nearly a century ago, in Ireland, a woman named Eleanor Butler, of very grand family, and a younger woman named Sarah Ponsonby resolved that they would not marry, not anybody, ever, and would instead live with each other. And one spring night in 1778 they ran. Sarah went out through the parlour window in men's clothes with a pistol in her hand and her little dog under her arm, and the families gave chase, as families do, and caught them that first time, and separated them, and lectured them, and might as well have lectured the weather, because the two of them simply waited and ran again, and this time nobody caught them. They crossed to Wales and took a cottage above Llangollen, and there they stayed, constants, for the rest of their lives, half a century, two ladies in one house, gardening, reading Rousseau, improving the dairy, wearing their famous matching black riding habits, and never spending a night apart. And now watch carefully what the world did about it, because this is the founding precedent of your whole existence. The world did not hound them, the world beat a path to their door. Wordsworth came and wrote them a sonnet in their own garden. Walter Scott came, duchesses came, and generals, and eventually the interest of the court itself was engaged. And the king granted them a pension from the civil list, the state of England formally subsidising, if you stand back and look at it squarely, the most celebrated elopement of two women in European history. They were praised in verse as models of the higher friendship, visited like a shrine, consulted like oracles, and in 50 years of pilgrims filing through that little Gothic house. Past the bed, Constance, past the one bed, we have no record that a single visitor ever stood in the garden and said the obvious thing aloud. Saying it aloud was the one thing the entire ritual existed to prevent. The ladies were enthroned as proof of what female friendship could be, and every couple that came after them, you and Kitty included, has lived comfortably inside the precedent their fame built. It has been officially established, at the highest level, with poetry attached, that two ladies in one bed are a beautiful thing, and nothing else. The alibi has a royal warrant on it, my dear. It is the best connected blind spot in Britain. But if you want to know what could actually live behind that alibi, whole and hidden, you must come north with me now, to Yorkshire, to a dark-beamed medieval hall called Shibden on a hillside outside Halifax, because I promised you a diary of 5 million words, and it is time you met the woman who wrote it. Her name was Anne Lister. She was born in 1791. She inherited Shibden and its coal and its tenants, and she walked this world until 3 years into the present Queen's reign. Always in black, striding her own acres, negotiating her own coal leases with a hardness that made grown men complain, and the neighbourhood, which could see perfectly well that something about her did not match the pattern, did what neighbourhoods do, and gave her a nickname, Gentleman Jack. They said it behind her back, and sometimes called it after her on the road. And notice, Constance, Even the mockery proves the rule we have been building all night. Because the mockery had nowhere to go. There was no law to call on, no word to escalate to, no charge to file. The worst the world could do to Anne Lister was a nickname, and she absorbed it the way Shibden absorbed weather. And every night of her adult life, this striding, bargaining, unmistakable woman sat down and wrote her diary, page after page, the rents, the roads, the dinner guests, and then, when the entry reached the parts of her day the world had no word for, the handwriting itself would change. Sliding into a private cipher of her own invention, Greek letters and algebraic signs run together, which she called her Crypthand, and in that hidden hand she set down, across decades, with a fullness and a candour no other woman of her age dared anywhere, exactly who she was. She wrote, in that code, that she loved, and only ever could love, the fairer sex, that her heart revolted from any other love than theirs, and that this was not a habit or a lapse, but her nature, given, unchosen, and not to be repented. Sit with that a moment, in the dark, because it may be the loneliest and bravest sentence of the whole century. A woman with no book to read herself in, no name for herself but a street jibe, no church, no doctor, no law that would so much as admit she existed, worked herself out from first principles, alone, by lamplight, in algebra, and concluded that she was not a mistake. And then, being Anne Lister, she acted on the conclusion. She courted Constance, deliberately, seriously, and in plain sight, using the only machinery the age provided, which was, of course, the machinery of friendship, morning calls and long walks and correspondence and extended visits. And the diary records the campaigns in both hands, open and hidden, like a general keeping one map for the staff and one for himself. And in 1822 she made her own pilgrimage to Llangollen, like everybody else, and took tea with the two old ladies among their books, and then went back to her inn and asked her diary the question 50 years of politer visitors had refused to form, whether what she had just seen was really the pure friendship of the poems, and answered herself, in effect, that she could not help doubting it, that she judged the matter by her own heart. One knowing eye, Constance, in half a century of worshippers. It takes one to see one, and the age had arranged that there should be almost nobody it takes. And then, because a lister does not doubt without proceeding to business, she found her answer to the whole predicament, and her answer was a wedding. Her name was Anne Walker, a shy, anxious, wealthy neighbouring heiress, and the two of them settled it between themselves as solemnly as any couple in England, and on Easter Sunday of 1834 they went together to Holy Trinity Church in Goodramgate in York, and knelt and took the sacrament side by side, and from that morning counted themselves, before God if not before the registrar, married. No law recognised it. No family celebrated it. But Anne Walker moved into Shibden Hall with her goods and her income, and the two women lived there as a settled pair, rearranging the gardens, quarrelling over improvements, travelling, wintering, enduring each other's relations, everything, in short, that a marriage is. And Halifax looked up the hill at the two ladies of Shibden and saw a rich, eccentric, and her friend, the heiress, sharing a roof for company, as ladies do. The truth had been spoken out loud exactly once, in a church, to God, who was presumed discreet, and written down every night in a cipher no one living could read. Hold the thought of those diaries, Constance, stacking up year by year in their black japanned boxes, 5 million words deep. We are not finished with them. Before this century is out, a man of that family will sit down with a friend and a lamp and begin, letter by Greek letter, to break his ancestors' code, and what happens in that room is the last door of this episode, and I will take you through it before you sleep, I promise. Back in South Kensington it is past noon, and you and Kitty are dressed and out, because an affair conducted as a friendship keeps a friendship's calendar, which is to say a full one, and the city itself is on your side. You know from our last visit to this century how carefully London is fenced for a lady, how she cannot eat alone in public or walk alone or simply be alone anywhere outside her own house, and how the fences force her, hour by hour, into the company of other women. For Clara, 11 years ago, that was the cage. For you, Constance, it is the cover, because a world where women must go about in pairs is a world where no particular pair is ever remarkable. You and Kitty move through the whole female city in step. The galleries, the drapers, the tea room at the department store, two ladies at a small marble table leaning close over the teapot, and the room reads Devoted Friends, as it reads every other table, and the truth sits there in the steam, perfectly visible and perfectly unseen. And it is at that table, over the second cup, that Kitty mentions, in a voice with nothing in it at all, that Mrs. Fanshaw's niece has asked her to Norfolk for a month of June, and that she is minded to accept. And here you discover something the etiquette books certainly never wrote down, which is what jealousy does when it is forbidden a vocabulary. A husband may make a scene. A suitor may demand, sulk, write letters with underlining in them. You may do none of it, because a scene requires a claim, and your claim has no name, and so the storm that follows is conducted entirely in the code you learned at Miss Marchmont's. A certain stillness over the teacup, a reply half a beat late, a sudden warm interest in your own engagements for June, the word charming applied to the niece with the temperature of a coal cellar. To the next table, it is two ladies discussing the season. Between you it is thunder and lightning and the whole sky coming down, and it ends the way these storms end. Her gloved hand resting on yours for 1 second too long as the bill is paid, which in your grammar is an entire act of contrition, accepted. The age thinks it has denied you a language. Constance, it has only made you fluent in a better one. And the niece, for the record, will be refused by Wednesday's post. Walking home through the park in the long light, let us look at the year the way you and Kitty have learned to look at it, because an affair that lives inside a respectable calendar learns to read that calendar the way a sailor reads tides, and the tides, Constance, are astonishingly kind. Every August, Henry goes north for his fortnight of grouse with his brother, a fixture as old as the marriage, and it is Henry himself, these 5 years past, who says, in the settled tone of a man solving everyone's problems at once, that you must not mope alone in town, you must go to Kitty. And so the shooting season opens 2 households at a stroke. Then comes the seaside, because the London summer is held to be poisonous, and the whole professional class performs its great annual migration. Wives, children and maids installed at Broadstairs or Eastbourne for 6 or 8 weeks of salt air. Husbands staying up in town with their offices, and coming down by the Saturday train, returning Monday at dawn, and the arithmetic of that arrangement, spoken aloud by absolutely nobody, is that for 5 days of every 7, all summer long, the seafronts of England are a republic of women. You and Kitty have taken the same lodgings at Broadstairs, 3 summers running, 2 ladies, 1 sitting room, sea view, and when Henry comes down on his Saturdays, he finds his wife brown and cheerful, and is delighted with the whole system. Christmas belongs to his mother. That is the toll gate of the year, 10 days in Shropshire being weighed by aunts, and even there the post runs daily and Kitty's letters arrive with the family's "Read at the same breakfast table, my dear Constance" at the top, and everything underneath in the language you both keep for underneath. Add the standing Tuesdays and Fridays, the sick clauses, the theatre in winter, because Henry cannot abide the theatre, and you arrive at the sum which would knock the wind clean out of your great-granddaughters. This affair, conducted under the most watchful social system ever built, gets more unquestioned hours together in a year than half the licensed marriages in London. The calendar of respectability, Constance read correctly, is a lover's almanac, and nobody ever taught you to read it that way, and neither of you can remember learning. And once a year, at the top of the winter, The world hands you something better than ours. It hands you a spectacle, and you may stand in the middle of it. Remember the Fanshaw's dance in January. A private ball is a machine for marrying. We have toured its engine rooms before. Every mother a lighthouse. Every daughter watched from the wall. Every pairing counted. And into this counting house comes the oldest small crisis of the English ballroom. After supper, the gentlemen thin out, to the card room, to the smoking, to the punch, and the music is still playing, and the floor stands half empty. And there is a fixed and cheerful remedy, as old as the assembly rooms, and the hostess herself administers it. The ladies are set to dance with one another. Nobody thinks twice. Constance, that is the point. It is thrift again. Music going spare, and girls wanting exercise. And besides, every woman on that floor learned to waltz in a schoolroom full of girls, half of them taught to take the gentleman's part, so that England is quietly full of ladies who can lead. And on that January night Kitty put out her hand with exactly the right laugh, a laugh calibrated for the benefit of the room, and you took it, and she led. One waltz. Her hand at your waist, your hand on her shoulder, the turns coming easy, because you have both known how, since you were 12, round and round under the Fanshaw's good candles, in front of 40 chaperones, 30 of whom were watching the girl in pink and the cavalry officer by the door, and 10 of whom were watching nothing at all. And it is the only time in the whole public year, my dear, that your century permits you to hold each other in your arms in front of everybody, moving to music, and call it filling out the programme. You spent the next week on it. You are spending part of tonight on it now. All these weeks later, and somewhere in London every winter, on some other waxed floor, some other pair is banking the same waltz, and the age looks on and sees its own charming economy. Ladies obliging when the gentlemen fail, and applauds itself for the arrangement, and puts another log on the fire, all of which raises the question of what a love does with itself when it is never, ever, allowed to speak its own name in company. And the answer, Constance, is that it builds a language, and the languages these couples built are among the small lost masterpieces of your century. Every marriage develops its dialect, of course, its little words, but a marriage may also speak plainly whenever it likes, so its dialect stays a luxury. Yours is infrastructure. You and Kitty have a word for, I am tired of these people and want you to myself, and it is a remark about the barometer. You have a phrase for the anniversary you keep, which is not her wedding anniversary and not yours, but the date of a certain rainy afternoon at a lending library 8 years ago. And you call it, in front of anyone at all, our old joke about the umbrellas, and Henry has toasted it twice, genially, at his own table. The gallery tonight is full of such grammar. The ladies of Llangollen, in their journals, wrote of each other as my beloved, my better half, the phrases of marriage borrowed whole, and in their cottage the two names were carved and twined together on the furniture, like a monogram of the thing itself. Anne Lister and her circle exchanged rings, and kept private anniversaries with all the solemnity of a court calendar, and the two poets waiting for us a little further down the gallery go further than anybody. In their own household, between themselves, Catherine has always been Michael, and Edith answers to Henry, so that the pen name the world thinks is a disguise is actually, behind the front door, simply what they call each other, the mask worn all the way in, until it is the face. And notice what all this fluency amounts to, because it is the tender twin of something we said about the tea room. A couple that may never declare itself learns to conduct its entire inner life in the open, folded into weather remarks and old jokes and the names of dogs, love passing across crowded dinner tables disguised as nothing, fully audible, perfectly hidden, and the age that listens and hears only small talk has, in a sense you may enjoy on the way to sleep, been outwritten in its own drawing rooms, every evening, for 100 years, by the people it refused to give a vocabulary, It denied you the great public words, Constance, wife, love, ours. You minted small, private ones, and paid yourselves in full. The barometer is falling, you will say to Kitty across the Fanshaw's candles next week. And Mrs. Fanshaw will glance at the window, and Kitty will say, so it is, and that, in the only dictionary that matters, is the whole of the poetry the age thought it had forbidden. But now I owe you the other side of all this ease, because the blind spot was not a law of nature. It was a belief, and beliefs can be put on trial. And once, within living memory's edge, one was, and every couple in this episode, has lived ever since in the shelter of the verdict. Come to Edinburgh, in 1811, to a respectable little boarding school on Drumshoe Gardens, kept by two schoolmistresses, Miss Marianne Woods and Miss Jane Peary, friends since girlhood, who had scraped and saved and finally opened the school that was to be their whole livelihood and their whole life. Among their pupils was a girl named Jane Cumming, granddaughter of a formidable widow of fortune, Dame Helen Cumming Gordon, and in the November of that year the girl went home to her grandmother and told her a story about what she said she had heard and felt in the dark of the shared beds, the mistresses visiting each other's pupils' beds at night, the whispering, the movements, the things a girl of 16 should have had. The age was certain, no means of imagining. The grandmother wrote her letters that same week, and within days, Constance, days, the school was empty. Every pupil fetched away in carriages without one word of explanation to the two women standing in their own hallway watching their lives drive off down the street. No charge was possible, remember. There was no crime on the books. So it was the mistresses themselves who went to law, suing the grandmother for the ruin of their name, which meant that a court of elderly Scottish judges was now obliged to sit, wigged and appalled, and decide as a matter of fact whether two British gentlewomen could conceivably have done such things at all. And the judges divided and wrangled for years, and the record of their reasoning is one of the strangest documents of the age. One judge held plainly that the accusation was equal to murder, and the thing itself next to impossible. Another declared outright that the crime alleged had, in this country, no existence, and when pressed to explain how the girl could have invented such a tale, the court found its answer in geography. Because Jane Cumming had been born in India, and their lordships satisfied themselves that she had imported the very idea from the East, since no girl bred in Britain could have conceived it, a piece of reasoning as ugly about one empire as it was convenient about the other. And I give it to you plainly because it is what happened. The case crawled on for nearly 10 years, up at last to the House of Lords, and the two women won, formally, finally, completely. And they had lost everything anyway. The school was gone, the savings were gone into the lawyers, the friendship itself, some say, did not survive the decade of the courtroom, and the damages, when they at last arrived, were a fraction of the ruin. But the verdict outlived them both, because a British court had now examined the possibility of passion between respectable women at full length with counsel, and had ruled it, in effect, unthinkable. Every door we have walked through tonight was propped a little wider by that judgment, Constance. The ladies kept their pension, Anne Lister kept her wedding, you will keep your Friday nights. In part because two ruined schoolmistresses forced the law to look straight at the truth, and the law, under oath, with the whole world watching, blinked and swore there was nothing there. From a cold Edinburgh courtroom then, to the warmest lamplight in the age, because the blind spot did not only shelter the discreet, it sheltered the spectacular, and nobody in the century was more spectacular than Charlotte Cushman. She was an American, a Boston merchant's daughter with a voice like a cathedral organ, and she arrived in London in the 1840s and became, quite simply, the most famous actress in the English-speaking world, and she did it, in large part, in breeches. Her greatest role was Romeo. Her own sister Susan played Juliet. The Haymarket sold out night after night. And respectable London, the same London that fainted at a waltz held too close, packed the stalls to watch a woman in doublet and hose court embrace and kiss another woman under the limelight, and wept and cheered and came back Tuesday with their daughters. The critics did not squirm, Constance, that is the marvellous part. They swooned. They wrote that no male Romeo of the generation had made love so convincingly that at last the balcony scene had found a lover worthy of it. And the Age took this as a verdict on the deficiencies of actors rather than as information about Charlotte Cushman. Because of course it did. Because a woman cannot want, and therefore a woman making magnificent love to Juliet 8 shows a week must be exhibiting technique. Offstage, Cushman lived entirely, and more or less openly, among women, in a rolling household of what one observer called her little band of emancipated females, and the great and good who dined with her simply declined to add anything up. It was left to a poet to do the arithmetic, privately. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, meeting Cushman and her inseparable companion Matilda Hayes, with their matching tailored bodices and their vows, wrote in a letter to her own sister that the two had made a pact of eternal attachment, that they lived together and dressed alike, and that it was, in her phrase, a female marriage. She did not write it in alarm, mind you. She wrote it the way one notes an interesting new arrangement in hats. The phrase went into the envelope went into the post, and the Age went back to applauding. And there is your celebrity clause, Constance. Fame, which strips every other public person naked, wrapped Charlotte Cushman in one more layer, because the more visible a woman was, the more completely the doctrine covered her. Nobody hides better than someone the whole world is looking at wrongly, and when London's fogs wore on her, Cushman did what all the interesting women of the Age eventually did, and moved the whole menage to Rome. And it is worth following her there for a moment, because Rome shows you the blind spot's foreign office. In a sunny street near the Spanish Steps, Cushman kept a tall house that became the headquarters of something the 19th century had never quite seen before, a colony of unmarried women living by their own earnings and answerable to absolutely nobody. Sculptors, mostly, and writers, young American and English women who had discovered that in Rome a lady could rent a studio, hire her own models, walk to her work through the morning market, and be excused all of it as artistic temperament. The most famous of them, Harriet Hosmer, rode her own horse across the Campagna at dawn, unaccompanied, in defiance of every rule her homeland held sacred, ran a workshop of Italian stonemasons like a small industrialist, and sold marble to duchesses. And visiting gentlemen from home would come to dinner, note down the whole miraculous arrangement with a mixture of horror and delight, coin little phrases about the strange sisterhood of lady sculptors, and sail home entirely unenlightened. Distance, you see, was one more layer of the coat. What might have looked, in Kensington, almost legible, dissolved abroad into the general foreignness of everything, and households of 2 English women were scattered all down Italy and France on exactly this arithmetic, the pension keepers of the continent long accustomed to the milady and her friend who required, as always, one room, the beds pushed together on account of the draughts. And no draught was ever inquired into. Half the love stories of your century, Constance, are filed in hotel registers between Florence and Sorrento under the single word, amiche, friends. The continent could not pronounce the truth any more than England could, but it shrugged in a warmer accent, and for a certain kind of Englishwoman that shrug was worth the whole journey. Which brings us to travel itself, the greatest license of them all, and one you and Kitty have already begun, quietly, to plan. Remember the 15-minute rule. A lady alone with a gentleman in a closed drawing-room for a quarter of an hour has compromised herself, and a railway carriage or a hotel corridor only sharpens the arithmetic which is why a lady cannot cross London with a bachelor, let alone Europe. But watch what happens when the bachelor is a woman. Two ladies travelling together are not merely permitted, Constance. They are the recommended formation, praised in the guidebooks as prudent and economical, smiled on by every family in England, because each lady is presumed to be chaperoning the other. And pause on that a moment, because it is the system confessing its whole theology in 4 words. Each is guarding each. Guarding her from what? From men, obviously, since nothing else exists to guard against. And so the machinery of protection folds itself around the pair of you like a hired courier and waves you through every gate in Europe. You may share a sleeping compartment on the night train to Nice, a cabin on the Channel steamer, a room in every hotel from Bruges to Naples. 1 room, mind, because 2 would be an extravagance verging on the eccentric. And the further you go, the freer it gets. 6 weeks, 8 weeks, a whole winter for the sake of a weak chest, real or diplomatically acquired, and all of it will be reported home in your letters and read aloud at Henry's table as improving. The unmarried girls of your world are watched across a ballroom, Constance, and the married women across a continent are not watched at all, provided only that the other name on the hotel register is a woman's. Your age built the most elaborate travel surveillance in history. Couriers, chaperones, letters of introduction, and then issued half the population a document more powerful than any passport, which is one another. Kitty has the Baedeker for Italy already. It lives on her desk under the almanac with a pencil line under Verona. And neither of you has said anything about it out loud because you do not need to. And if you doubt that whole lives could be built on these licenses, not stolen fortnights but lives, look west for a moment, across the Atlantic, where the pattern has grown so common it has just this year acquired its name. In the cities of New England, there are now women, in real numbers, doing something no generation of women has quite done before. Earning their own respectable livings, as teachers, as doctors, as writers, as the first graduates of the new women's colleges. And such women face a novel arithmetic. Marriage, for them, means resigning the work, the income, the self, and so a remarkable number of them are declining it and setting up house instead, in pairs. 2 salaries, 1 hearth, a partnership of decades, presented to the world as economy and known to the neighbourhood as devotion and New England society, faced with parlour after parlour of these settled, respectable, plainly inseparable couples, has reached for the politest available noun and begun calling the arrangement a Boston marriage. Notice the work that name is doing, Constance, because it is your whole century in 2 words. The age looks directly at a household of 2 women, sees that it is, in every visible function, a marriage, says so, out loud, in the very name, and then, having said the word, declines absolutely to think the thought. And the arrangement is so far above suspicion that this very spring the celebrated Mr. Henry James has published an entire novel about one such pair, a Boston reformer, and the girl she loves and loses to a man, 700 pages turning the whole institution over in the light. And the reviews discuss the politics, the satire, the prose, everything except the one question a reader of a later century will think the book is about. The Age can print it, sell it, review it, and shelve it, and still not see it. You could stand in a Boston parlour, my dear, between the 2 brass candlesticks given at the 10th anniversary, and the blindness would hold. It is not English weather, this fog. It is the whole ocean's. You do not have to cross the ocean, though. Until 2 years ago, you only had to cross the square. In Hereford Square, 10 minutes' walk from the bed you woke up in, there stood for 2 decades one of the most openly settled female households in England. And it belonged to Frances Power Cobb, And if the name makes you smile, Constance, it makes half of London smile, because everyone knows Miss Cobb. She is one of the most famous journalists alive. A vast, jolly, formidable Irishwoman who writes leading articles for the newspapers with her hat on, storms at Parliament about the wrongs of wives, and has made herself the terror of every fashionable vivisectionist in the kingdom. And for all of those 20 years, at the heart of all that public thunder, there was the quiet fixed point of Hereford Square, which she shared with the Welsh sculptor Mary Lloyd, and shares still, for the two of them have lately retired together to Mary's country in Wales. They kept one house, one purse, one table, one calendar, took their holidays together and their causes together, and Miss Cobb, who is constitutionally incapable of a closed mouth, has never made the smallest secret of what Mary is to her. In her letters, she calls her laughing, sometimes her wife, and sometimes her husband, depending on who has lately mended the household accounts, and dinner guests report that she speaks of the two of them exactly as married people speak. We never dine out on Thursdays. We are thinking of giving up the carriage. And society, which knows everything, has settled on its formula, the one it always reaches for, spoken with real warmth and total finality. Miss Cobb is devoted to her friend. When the end comes, years from tonight, there will be one grave in a Welsh churchyard with room left deliberately for the second name, and the obituaries of the age will manage the whole matter in the established way. Her lifelong companion, her devoted friend, and every reader will understand precisely as much as their century equips them to understand. That is how it is done at the very top of public life. Constance, not in shadows but in floodlight. Love, lived whole, out loud, for 30 years, and filed by every record office in Britain under friendship. The age's great catch-all drawer, which holds everything and examines nothing. And if you want to see the household of two given a brass plate and a prospectus, look at the great new industry of your generation. The education of girls, because the profession your age invented to raise its daughters is very largely run, Constance, by exactly the households this episode is about. The new high schools, the new boarding schools, the first women's colleges rising outside Cambridge and Oxford, all of them need what almost no other respectable calling provides. Educated women, unmarried by definition, since marriage ends a mistress's post, living together on the premises for life. A school is founded by two ladies the way a firm is founded by two brothers. Miss Somebody takes the teaching and Miss Somebody else the accounts. They pool their savings for the lease. They share the private wing and the sitting room, and the inventories being frank about what the age cannot afford to duplicate. Very often the bedroom and the parents of England hand over their daughters with both hands, precisely because the arrangement is so visibly devoted, so stable, so safe from the one danger anyone can imagine, which is men. The two most famous headmistresses in the country are a byword for it. The pioneering Miss Buss in London and the majestic Miss Beale at Cheltenham, neither ever married, both wedded, the age says approvingly, to their work. And the wits have even made a little rhyme about the pair of them, that Cupid's darts do not feel for Miss Buss and Miss Beale, and the whole country repeats it, laughing, and the laugh is the fog doing its work in miniature. The age can see that these formidable women live entirely outside the marriage economy, and the only story it can tell about that is an absence, a joke about darts that missed. It has no way of asking what might be present instead, in this school or that one, behind this brass plate or that, where the founding friendship has lasted 40 years, and the two names are on the deed together, and the staff know better than to knock at the private sitting room after 9. Some of those partnerships were everything tonight is about, and some were exactly the working friendships they appeared, and the age could not tell the difference. And here is the point, my dear, so let it settle. Neither can history, in most cases, even now, because the age's blindness went into the record books, and what was never asked was never written. The couples in tonight's gallery are the ones who left diaries and poems. Behind them stand thousands, in schools and vicarages and seaside terraces, whose whole story is two names in a census, one address, and the word we will keep bumping into all night on their gravestones, friend. And for the strangest performance of the whole strategy, consider the poet who is publishing some of the most passionate love lyrics in England at this very moment, a rising man of letters by the name of Michael Field. The critics have been kind to Michael Field. Robert Browning himself has praised him, and Michael Field does not exist. Behind the name are two ladies of Bristol, Catherine Bradley and Edith Cooper, aunt and niece, which the age finds, when it eventually learns of it, merely charming, two clever spinster relations amusing themselves with verses. And the age's own filing system does the rest, because what the two of them actually are is everything the poems say. They have loved each other for years. Wholly, in the fullest sense they themselves insist upon in their private journal. And they have made vows, and one of their poems says it as plainly as it can ever be said, that they took hands and swore to stand against the world, poets and lovers, evermore. Poets and lovers. It is printed. Constance. You can buy it. And the reading public, encountering love poetry of that heat under a man's name, simply supplies the imagined mistress and admires the sincerity, and they are sincere, that is the deadpan glory of it. The most honest poet in England is two women telling the exact truth behind the one lie that makes the truth invisible. They confided the secret to old Browning, who let it slip, as poets will. And the knowledge is seeping now through literary London, and you can watch the reviews cooling as it spreads, the same verses that were virile and passionate becoming. In the notices, feminine and overwrought, word for word the same verses, which tells you everything about reviewing and nothing about the poems. But no scandal follows, notice. No law stirs, no doors close. The two ladies keep their house and their table and their work and each other, because even exposed, they fall not into disgrace, but into the drawer, devoted aunt and niece, companions in literature, and the drawer closes over them softly, as it closes over everyone tonight. They are keeping that journal still, by the way, year after year, a fat, honest record of the whole shared life, written for a posterity they trust more than their present, and posterity, I am glad to report across the century to them, was worth the trust. Now, you may be lying there wondering whether the fog ever thinned, whether the truth ever once got dragged all the way up into an English courtroom with the press in the gallery. And the answer is that it did, exactly once in a generation, and the age's handling of it is the finest demonstration of the whole machine you will hear tonight. 22 years ago, in 1864, London society was transfixed by the divorce of Admiral Codrington, a hero of the service, from his restless, unhappy wife Helen, and divorces being new and rare and scandalous, the case filled the newspapers for weeks. The Admiral accused his wife of adultery with two gentlemen in cabs and other unimaginative locations. The wife fought back, and in the middle of it all there appeared, subpoenaed into the witness box, a young woman who was neither wife nor gentleman. And every head in the courtroom turned, because everybody knew her. Emily Faithfull, the famous Miss Faithfull, the reformer, founder of the Victoria Press, that wonder of the age, a printing house staffed entirely by women compositors, a woman so respectable that the Queen herself had appointed her, by royal warrant, printer and publisher in ordinary to Her Majesty. And what the court heard, in fragments, between the lines, was that for years Mrs. Codrington and Miss Faithfull had been inseparable, that Emily had lived in the Admiral's house, that when the Admiral was at sea, the two women had shared a bed, that the Admiral had come, for reasons he struggled magnificently to articulate, to resent his wife's friend with a passion, and had at last banished her from the house. And there the proceedings arrived at the edge of the map, Constance, and you could watch, in the transcripts, the finest legal minds in England peering over that edge into something for which they had no charge. No question, no noun, and then stepping carefully back. There was even a sealed affidavit, sworn by Emily and never read aloud, its contents guessed at by the whole town and known by nobody to this day, a little paper package of the unsayable, sitting on the exhibits table with the whole of the age's silence folded inside it. The decree, when it came, turned on the gentlemen in the cabs. Because it had to. Because they were the only parties present the law could see. Whatever had or had not passed between the two women was left exactly where the age wanted it, in the fog, glimpsed and unexamined, and here is the after-history that proves the system's depth. Emily Faithfull was bruised by the scandal, dropped by some drawing rooms, whispered about for a season, and then, Constance, she went back to work, kept her press, kept her lectures, kept her royal warrant. And a few years from tonight, the Queen will grant her a pension from the civil list in honour of her services to women's employment. The one woman in Victorian England who was ever put in a witness box within arm's reach of the truth, my dear, ended her days a pensioner of the crown. The fog does not merely hide you, even when the wind shifts, and the whole town stares straight at the place where you are standing. It closes again before anything can be written down. But what about the servants, you are thinking? Because you know from every episode we have spent in this century that the servants see everything, and you are quite right, they do. Hannah sees the 2 cups of chocolate. Hannah sees the letters in their dozens, sees whose hand is on the envelope, sees the bed. Your own maid at Bayswater sees which visits put the colour back in your face, and Kitty's cook could tell you to the shilling what Thursday dinners cost compared to ordinary ones, and none of this, Constance, none of it, ever becomes what you would call knowledge. And the reason is the deepest lesson tonight has to teach. Gossip is a filing system too, and a file needs a name. Below stairs as above it, what the age can say about 2 ladies runs out at the same frontier, that they are very thick, that Madam is wrapped up in her friend, that it is a close friendship, mind, or, at the absolute outer edge, from a cook of long service and dark experience, that it is an unhealthy friendship, too fond, not natural somehow, and there the sentence dies, because the next word does not exist in the speaker's language. There is no name to promote the suspicion to. A footman who sees his master's coat in the wrong hallway can say the word affair, and the word will run down the street like a lit fuse and blow a household to pieces. Hannah, seeing everything, holds a fuse that connects to nothing, a live wire in a world with no socket for it. And what cannot be named cannot be reported, priced, threatened, or sold, which is why, and think about this in the dark, in a century where blackmail is a thriving cottage industry, where men of a certain kind live and die by the discretion of everyone they have ever known, there is no market at all in the secrets of women like you. What you are is not merely unpunishable, Constance, it is unmonetizable. The age has built you the one perfect safe in England, the only vault no cracksman bothers with, because the treasure inside it is officially worthless, and the price of the vault, we should say it again quietly, is that the treasure is officially worthless. Hannah will die at a great age in 1931, having seen absolutely everything, and having, in the truest sense available to her century, seen nothing at all. It is worth pausing, too, on what the gentlemen think they are looking at. Because the men of your world do see the great friendships. They are not blind to the fact of them, and what they have built to manage the site is a doctrine. And the doctrine is a masterpiece of comfortable thinking. It comes in 3 planks. Plank 1, it is a phase. The schoolgirl worship, the raves, the vows, All of it is understood to be a rehearsal that ends on the wedding day, girls being creatures of surplus feeling who must pour it somewhere until a husband arrives to receive it properly. And the fashionable nurseries even have a borrowed German word for the condition, Schwärmerei, a swooning enthusiasm, spoken with an indulgent shake of the head, as one speaks of a fever that every child must have once. Plank 2. It is convenient. Around the club fireplaces, the settled men agree, with the air of philosophers, that a wife's great friend is a domestic appliance of the first order. She absorbs the moods, shares the shopping, fills the chair at the theatre a husband would otherwise have to fill himself. And a fellow whose wife is well supplied with friendship dines out in peace. And if some corner of the arrangement is warmer than he quite follows, well, plank 3 arrives to close the matter. Whatever it is not serious, because it cannot be. Nothing real, so runs the axiom underneath all male comment on the subject, ever happens where there is no man to happen to. Punch prints its gentle cartoons of the inseparables. Two ladies sharing one umbrella into their 60s. And the joke, examine it, is never scandal. The joke is harmlessness, the sweet comic spectacle of devotion with, as the age reckons these things, no stakes. And there, Constance, is the whole male theory of you, a dress rehearsal, a convenience, a cartoon. It is condescension deep enough to swim in, and I know exactly what it costs to be patted on the head by your own century. But observe, one more time, what the condescension is worth on the open market. To be underestimated, my dear, is a tax and a shield, struck as one coin, and your age mints that coin by the ton, and hands it to you, and never once asks for change. The husbands of England guard their wives from clerks, curates, subalterns, dancing masters, from every male shadow that crosses the lawn, and wave through, smiling, carrying her own umbrella, the one rival in the world with a standing invitation to dinner. And here the account owes you some honesty about who exactly this fog was tailored for, because everything I have shown you tonight, the guest bedrooms, the companions, the winters in Italy, the 12 posts a day, all of it is cut from one cloth, and the cloth is money. The blind spot is a lady's garment. Further down the ladder, where nobody has a spare bedroom or a second establishment or the price of a Baedeker, women who loved women faced the same hearts on far harder terms, and some of them found a door of their own. And it is one of the strangest doors of the century. They put on men's clothes, took men's names, and married. Every few years the newspapers of your age carry another one, always in the same amazed tone. A groom, a stable hand, a publican, a soldier even, dead or injured or exposed at last, and found to have been, all along, a woman, and standing beside the discovery, half the time, a wife, sometimes of many years, sometimes to all appearances astonished, sometimes very plainly not astonished at all. The papers have a name for the phenomenon. They call such a person a female husband, and the age reads each case as a 9 days' wonder, a freak of imposture, a music hall turn escaped into life. But run tonight's lesson over it, Constance, and read it properly. Down where the licenses of ladyhood do not reach. This was what the door looked like. 2 women could not keep house together on a labourer's wages and be called companions. They could keep house as man and wife, and many did, for decades, in perfect peace, their marriages as sturdy as their neighbours, right up until an accident or an illness or an old acquaintance undid the whole thing. And now watch the law, one last time, reach into its bag and find nothing. The wedding was a deception, so the charge, when they troubled to bring one, was fraud, false pretences, irregularity in the registers, the crime of the paperwork, never of the love, because the love, as we have established all night, is not on the books. A woman could stand in the dock having lived as a husband for 20 years, and the state of England, with its whole arsenal at hand, could find nothing to call her but an inaccurate form. The poor woman's version of your blessing, Constance, was riskier, colder, and braver by a mile, and I want her stood here in the gallery tonight with the duchesses and the poets, because she bought with courage what the ladies of this episode were handed with the house. There is one more wall of the fortress to show you, and then the weather begins to change, and it is this. The age was not in fact entirely without the idea. It had the idea, and it kept the idea in quarantine. On the top shelf of every gentleman's library, in the Latin and Greek no lady is taught, the ancients speak of it plainly, and the word Sapphist exists, and scholars know their Sappho, carefully edited. In French novels, which is to say in the great yellow-backed contraband of the century, smuggled through customs and denounced from pulpits, it appears again, perfumed and lurid, and the reviews shudder at the depravity of Paris. And that is precisely how England holds the knowledge, Constance, at arm's length, in dead languages and foreign covers, always elsewhere, always long ago or far away or over the water. It is a vice of the ancients, a fever of the French, a rumour of the East, and thus, by definition, by geography, not a fact of Surrey. The idea is allowed to exist on the strict condition that it never applies to anyone you know. And this quarantine is the final ingenious course of the fortress wall, because it means that even a suspicious mind, even a Mrs. Fanshawe with her lorgnette and her long memory, has nowhere to put a suspicion about you and Kitty. To think the thought about two English ladies at her own tea table, she would have to fetch it from Paris, from Lesbos, from the top shelf, drag it dripping across the channel and the centuries, and apply it to the vicarage pew, and the sheer distance defeats her. The truth about you is not unknown in your world, my dear. It is worse than unknown. It is filed as foreign, and England's whole idea of itself stands guard on the filing, and no empire ever defended a border more faithfully than the one your neighbours patrol, in perfect innocence, around the possibility of you. And the quarantine produces one last domestic wonder, which is the parlour bookshelf. Because your age does not merely tolerate same-sex devotion in its literature, Constance, it weeps over it, nightly, on purpose, as a family activity. Consider the single most beloved poem of the entire century, the one the Queen herself has said, and it is on record, brings her comfort next only to her Bible. It is in memoriam, and it is the grief of one man for another, 17 years in the writing, Tennyson mourning his young friend Hallam in verse after verse of aching, undisguised tenderness, the lost hand he longs to hold, the beloved name he cannot say without breaking, and the whole of England reads it aloud at its firesides and gives it to the bereaved as consolation and sets it beside the scriptures, and never once files it anywhere near the top shelf, because it is filed under grief, and grief, like friendship, is a sacred drawer no one audits. On the same shelf sit the Brontes, whole novels beating with passionate attachments between women and Miss Rossetti's strange, delicious Goblin Market, two sisters and a rescue and lines about there being no friend like a sister in calm or stormy weather, read to children at bedtime in perfect serenity. Your century's imagination, do you see, is saturated with exactly the feeling it refuses to recognize, marinated in it, schooled by it, and the arrangement holds because literature enjoys the same immunity you do. The feeling is honored provided it is never a fact. Verse may hold hands. Sisters may cling. A laureate may spend 17 years writing love into a dead man's absence and be made a lord for it, and the same reader who knows every stanza by heart will sit across the tea table from you and Kitty and see two ladies who are very great friends. The books were the one place your age let the heart speak at full volume, Constance, and the age listened, and cried, and loved what it heard, and closed the cover, and the closing of the cover was the whole trick, and nobody ever taught it, and everybody knew it. But paper does not always stay closed. And so the age developed one more custom you must know about before the lamps go out. The quietest one in this whole episode, and the saddest. When a Victorian dies, the family goes through the papers, and then, as an ordinary act of decency, performed in every parish, every year, by the gentlest people alive, the family burns them. Executors burn, daughters burn their mother's letters, sisters burn sisters, and above all, Constance, the surviving friend, burns, because the couples of tonight's gallery knew perfectly well what their letters were, whatever the age pretended, and many of them left instructions, and the instructions were the fire, all over England, all century long. On the day after funerals, there have been small private bonfires in study grates, a lifetime of Tuesdays going up the chimney, an envelope at a time, the survivor sitting alone with the poker, feeding in 40 years of my own darling wife, watching the only witness die twice. It was protection, of course, and it was love, protecting the beloved's name even past the grave. And it is also why, when your great-granddaughters go looking for all these lives, they will find the cupboard so strange and so bare, a census here, a gravestone there, 2 names and 1 address, and everything in between gone to ash. The silence of the record, my dear, is not the silence of absence. It is the silence of 10,000 careful fires, and history will be tempted to read the blankness as proof that there was nothing to record, which is the fog's last and longest victory, working on quietly 100 years past its own funeral. And that, Constance, that precisely is why one stubborn hoard matters out of all proportion, why I keep steering us back toward a black and white hall in Yorkshire, where 5 million words sat in their boxes daring somebody to decide. The whole century is one long bonfire, and we are nearly at the room where a man stood with a match in his hand and did not strike it. And yet, Constance, even as you lie here in the best defended silence in Europe, the instrument of its ending has already gone to the printers. And I can date it for you exactly because it is happening now, this very year. In Vienna, in this spring of 1886, a professor of psychiatry named Richard von Krafft-Ebing is publishing a thick clinical volume called Psychopathia Sexualis, a casebook of human desire in all its varieties, the racier passages discreetly armoured in Latin, and among its numbered case histories, set down in the flat voice of medicine, are women. Women who love women, described not as monsters and not as impossibilities, but as cases, with childhoods and characters and histories, catalogued, classified, and above all named. It is a book by a doctor for doctors, and it will sell like a novel. And it is the beginning of the end of your entire world, because the fog you live in, remember, is made of exactly one ingredient, which is the age's inability to think the thought, and here is a professor thinking it in numbered paragraphs. Behind him come the others, the new men of the notebooks who call themselves sexologists, and in England a gentle, bearded young doctor named Havelock Ellis will spend the 90s assembling the first English study of what he calls inversion, patiently collecting the life stories of real men and real women, writing to them, believing them, and the case nearest to hand he will not have to write to, because, in one of the quietest ironies of the century, the woman he marries keeps her own kitty, and he knows it, and the book, when it comes, will be prosecuted as obscene within the year. An English court, unable to tell the difference between studying the fog and spreading it. It will take decades, all of this. The word lesbian will creep out of the classical dictionaries 1 inch a year, but the direction is set, tonight, in Vienna, and I want you to feel the full 2-sided weight of it as you lie there, because both sides are true at once. To be named is to be seen, and to be seen is to be believed at last, real at last, possible at last. And it is also, in the same breath, to be watchable, diagnosable, treatable, a case where you used to be a friendship. The doctors who built your invisible room are being replaced by doctors with lamps, and the lamp will find every couple in this episode eventually, and history has still not entirely decided, my dear, whether that morning was a rescue or a raid. Probably it was both. Most mornings are, and before the lamp reaches the women, it will reach the men. And you should know what is coming, because London will never be the same after. 9 years from tonight, in the spring of 1895, the most celebrated wit in England, a married Irishman at the very top of his fame, with 2 plays running in the West End at once, will sue the wrong Marquess for libel, and the suit will collapse, and the machinery Mr. Labouchere built on that August midnight will turn, and Oscar Wilde will be tried, twice, under Section 11, and convicted of gross indecency, and sentenced to 2 years' hard labour. And the Age will watch every minute of it. The newspapers will print what they can and imply the rest. Crowds will jeer at a man who, a season earlier, they had queued to applaud. And in the drawing rooms of your world, Constance, women like you and Kitty will read the reports in a silence nobody around them will know how to read, because every line of it is a message about the fog. The message says, "This is what happens when the age can think the thought. This is the other shore, the one the men live on, where the law has words and uses them, where letters are evidence and friendship is a charge sheet, where the same devotion that earns you a pension earns him the treadmill. The trials will frighten some of the women of your kind, and it will take a later century to say clearly what they were frightened of, which was not the law still cannot see them, but the demonstration, the proof of what being seen costs. And others, reading the same reports by the same lamplight, will feel something stranger and colder underneath the fear, a thing almost like envy, and nothing like it. Because to be punished, Constance, a thing must first be believed in. The Age hates Oscar Wilde, and hatred is a kind of terrible acknowledgement. What it offers you is neither hatred nor honour, but a great soft nothing. And on the far side of that spring, every woman in this episode understands her bargain completely. The fog is her shield and her erasure. One fabric, no seams, and there is no wearing half of it. And while the trials are thundering, notice who is walking past the courthouse, because the 90s are filling London with a figure your generation was never issued, and she is about to give the fog its last great extension. The papers call her the New Woman, half in mockery, and she is unmistakable. She is 24. She works at the typewriting or the telegraph office or the new board schools. She rides a bicycle in the scandalous rational dress if she is feeling strong. And she carries, this is the detail that upsets the aunts most, her own latchkey. She lives in town, on her own wages, and since a girl cannot live entirely alone and rents being what they are, she lives with another girl, and the builders of London, quick as ever, are running up entire mansion blocks of little flats designed for exactly this tenant. Ladies' residential chambers, 2 small rooms and a shared kitchen down the hall. No husbands anywhere in the architecture. The novelists have taken her up. One of them has just put the whole phenomenon in a title and called such women the odd women. Odd, in the old sense, the ones left over when the pairs were made. And there it is again, Constance, the redundancy story, the consolation file, refreshed for a new generation and doing the same old work. Because look at what the bachelor girl and her flatmate actually hold, and compare it with everything tonight has inventoried. No husband to manage, no Henry, no Bayswater, no carriage sent at 7, an income, however thin, of their very own, a front door that locks from the inside, and a social theory, ready-made and universally believed, that explains the 2 of them at a stroke, poor girls, making do, sharing to save. Some of them are making do. And some of them, history will eventually be able to say it plainly, are the granddaughters of this whole episode, the first generation of your kind, my dear, to get the household of 2 at 24 instead of widowhood. without an inheritance, without a Plas Newydd, on nothing but a salary and a flatmate agreement, and the age smiles its pitying smile over the odd women, so awfully brave, so sadly unclaimed, and hands them the keys. The fog, in other words, is performing its last and strangest service. Even now, even this late, with the notebooks open and the trials in the paper, it is still misfiling love as necessity, and the misfiling is still, for one more generation, the roomiest coat in England. Now we can settle accounts with the law properly and lay one famous ghost while we are at it. Because the future is going to tell a story about tonight, Constance, and you deserve to hear it debunked in advance. The story goes that when Parliament passed that 1885 law, a clause about women was drafted too, and that Queen Victoria herself struck it out, refusing to believe such creatures existed, and it is repeated everywhere in the centuries after you, at dinner parties, in newspapers, in books that should know better, and it is a legend, wall to wall. There was never a clause about women for anyone to strike. No letter, no memorandum, no scribble in any royal margin has ever been found, and the Queen, whatever her private imagination, was never asked, and the truth, as usual, is stranger and more revealing than the myth, because the myth at least imagines that somebody in authority thought about you, if only to refuse the thought. Nobody did. The silence of the statute book was not a queen's incredulity. It was a whole parliament's, a whole civilization's. And we know this for certain because of what happens when somebody finally does think of it. And I will step outside the century for 1 minute to show you, because it is the last brick in the wall. In 1921, 35 years from tonight, with the Queen 20 years dead and the world remade by a war, a member rises in the Commons at last and proposes the amendment, "Gross indecency between female persons, the mirror of Section 11, and the Commons, in its modern wisdom, passes it, and it goes up to the House of Lords, and the Lords throw it out. And here is the marvel, they explain why, on the record, in Hansard, forever. To make it criminal, the noble Lords argue, would be to advertise it. To name the offence in law would be to teach its existence to innocent women who have never heard of it. To put the idea into 1,000 quiet households where it has never entered. And so, their lordships conclude, for the protection of English womanhood, the law must continue to say nothing. There it is, Constance, at last, in the 20th century's own handwriting, the policy of the fog stated as policy. Your invisibility was never mercy. It was a decision, renewable, renewed, that what you are must not even be legislated against, lest legislation make you imaginable, and no law against love between women was ever passed in England. Not in your century, not in the next, not ever, and the age that managed that trick deserves to lie awake a moment, contemplating what it did. But you do not, my dear. You did not build the fog. You only learned, magnificently, to navigate in it. Which leaves us one promise to keep, in a lamplit room in Yorkshire, because you have waited all night to know what happened to Anne Lister's diaries, and it is time. She died in 1840, far from home, travelling in the Caucasus with her wife, and Anne Walker brought the body the long road back to Halifax. And the diaries, all the decades of them, stayed at Shibden, boxed and silent, while the century rolled on past them. And in the 1890s, a few years from the night you were lying in, the last Lister of Shibden Hall, an antiquarian bachelor named John, sets about the family papers, as antiquarians do, and finds the volumes, and finds the Crypthand, page after page of Greek letters and algebra threading through the honest English of rents and roads. And a puzzle like that is irresistible to men of his sort, so he enlists a schoolmaster friend, Arthur Burrell, and together, by lamplight, the two of them work at it, tallying frequencies, testing guesses, until one evening the cipher gives, and the hidden hand opens. And out of the code, in her own steady voice, across half a century, comes Anne entire. The courtships, the nature she had worked out alone and refused to repent, the Easter sacrament at Goodram Gate, and the marriage it sealed. Everything. 5 million words, 1/6 of them now legible for the first time to living eyes, and the two men sit back from the table and look at what they are holding, which is nothing less than the truth of the whole subject of tonight, written from inside. And Borel gives his advice. And his advice, Constance, is fire. Burn them. All of them. He will say it again in writing, years later, unrepentant. The record was monstrous, and the kind thing, the decent thing, the Victorian thing, was ash. And John Lister, this quiet, respectable antiquarian, who has his own reasons, historians will gently conclude, to know what the world does with men and women it has finally managed to see. John Lister says no. And then he does the most perfectly Victorian thing ever done in this entire episode. The act that holds the whole century in one gesture. He does not publish the truth and he does not destroy it. He takes the volumes, all of them, and he hides them behind the oak panelling of Shibden Hall, inside the wall of the house itself, and closes the wood over them, and tells nobody, and dies. The age looks at the truth, Constance, and it cannot bear to speak it, and it cannot bear to kill it, and so it does what it has done all night, every hour of tonight, in every drawing room and courtroom and parlour we have visited. It papers over it, and lives in the house, knowing, and the wall, in the end, was on your side. The Diaries outlived John, outlived the panelling, outlived the fog itself, and in the century after next, scholars will lift them out and break the code again and read her at last in the open, and the little church in Goodram Gate, where two women knelt in 1834, wears a plaque now, put up by a kinder age, and people stand in front of it with flowers. Constance. With flowers. It took the better part of 2 centuries, but the sacrament got its witnesses, and now the lamps are being lit along your own square, because it is evening in South Kensington, and Henry's carriage has been sent for you, and we should walk you to the door. Constance. Slowly, the way the tired end of a good day walks. Kitty comes down to the step with you, bareheaded, which her maid considers reckless in April. And there on the doorstep, in the blue hour, in full view of the railings and the lamplighter and Mrs. Fanshaw's parlour window across the way, she takes both your hands and kisses you goodbye. And the square sees exactly what it has always seen, 2 devoted friends parting until Tuesday, and the carriage takes you east through the park with your cheek against the cold glass. And at home in Bayswater there is Henry, pleased to have you back, full of his day, and there is dinner, and his mother's letter read aloud, and the ordinary kindly furniture of the marriage, and none of it is a lie. Exactly. Which is the part the future will find hardest to hold. The age has arranged your heart like one of its own households, the public rooms at the front, warm, real, and shown to everyone, and one locked room upstairs that the plan of the house does not admit to. Later, alone, you will open the drawer in your writing desk, the one with the key you keep on your ribbon, where Louisa's last letter lies under Kitty's hundreds, tied in blue, and you will add today to the archive and turn the key and understand, in the quiet, the exact size of your bargain. Kitty's freedom is a widow's and yours is a wife's, which is narrower, and there will be no household of 2 for you, no Hereford Square, no Shibden, unless some far-off grief hands it to you. And you are not permitted even to imagine that, and do not. What you are permitted is this: Tuesdays and Fridays, 6 weeks of Italy filed under her chest, a lifetime of letters, 12 posts deep, a love conducted entirely in the open and never once seen, and safety, real safety, of a kind the men on the other shore would weep for, Nobody will ever persecute you, Constance, and nobody will ever congratulate you. You will get away with all of it, every day, for as long as you both shall live, which is the title of tonight kept to the letter, and as you turn the key you know precisely what the words got away with are worth, because the age is not letting you keep something, it is refusing to know you have it. So let us do the accounts honestly, both columns, before the candles go out, because that is what this museum is for. It is true, and tonight has shown it a dozen ways, that the women of your kind in this century got away with what no other kind of lover in England could have dreamed of getting away with. Decades under one roof, vows kept, anniversaries counted, graves shared, and all of it not merely unpunished but pensioned, praised, and published. And it is equally true that the price was written into every line of the license, because they got away with it the way a thing gets away when nobody believes it exists. And beneath the notice of the law is still beneath notice, and there are worse fates than a trial. But there is also something in a human heart that wants its one great fact. Someday, somewhere, witnessed, and the age denied them that absolutely every one of them, the ladies in their Gothic cottage, the squire in her church pew, the poets behind their man's name, all loved, all hidden, all safe, all unseen, the coat and the fog cut from the one cloth with no seam to unpick. And yet, and here is where I want to leave the scales, inside the fog they lived, Constance, not survived, lived. 50 years at Plas Newydd with the dairy and the Rousseau, 30 years of Thursday dinners at Hereford Square, a wedding at the altar rail of a real church on a real Easter morning, the age that refused to see them also, in its blindness, left them alone, genuinely alone, alone together, which is more, it must be said in fairness, across the water of time, than several of the seeing centuries after them managed to allow. And if you want a single sentence to fold the whole strange era into, take this one. They lived whole lives inside a world that swore such lives were impossible. And the proof those lives existed slept safely, all the while inside a wall, waiting for people who could bear to read it. And so, before you sleep, the honours, because this museum closes the way it always closes, by name and with the lights going down, to the schoolgirls and their raves, who loved first and hardest, and were told it was practice, and to the ones for whom it was never practice at all, to every letter writer of the 12-post city, and the 10,000 darling wife letters that crossed London with the morning milk, hiding nothing and hidden completely, to Eleanor and Sarah, who went out through the parlour window with a pistol and a little dog, and made a Welsh cottage the most famous address in friendship, and to every pilgrim who stood in their garden and politely declined to understand, to Anne Lister, who worked out in algebra alone what no book would tell her, and repented nothing, and to Anne Walker, who knelt beside her at Goodramgate and kept the vow through everything after, to Charlotte, magnificent in breeches, and Matilda of the female marriage, and the sculptors of Rome on their dawn horses, to the Boston ladies with their 2 salaries and their 1 hearth, and to Francis and Mary, devoted friends by every obituary and rather more by every fact, asleep now in one grave in Wales with both names on the stone after all, to Catherine and Edith, poets and lovers, evermore, who told the whole truth under one small lie and trusted us to arrive, to Emily Faithful, printer to the Queen, who sat in the one witness box in England within reach of the secret, and walked out with her presses still running, to Marianne Woods and Jane Peary, ruined by a court that saved them, who paid the whole cost of the age's blindness in one lifetime so that the fog would hold for everybody else, to the female husbands in their sturdy marriages, tried for their paperwork and never for their hearts, the bravest economists of love in the century, to the companions, the second selves, the friends who came to stay and never left, in every terrace of every town, uncounted, uncountable, because the records were designed not to count them, To the letters that went into the grates of careful executors, a century of love keeping its last appointment with the chimney, and to the few pages that slipped the fire, so that tonight could be told at all. To Hannah, and every servant who saw everything, and held a wire the world gave no socket to, and to John Lister, last of Shibden, who could not speak the truth and would not burn it, and chose the wall, and by choosing the wall, chose us. As for you, my friend, listening in the dark on the far side of all those closed doors, take the inventory. The words exist now. The thought is thinkable. The name is speakable. The banns, in a great many places on this round world, are publishable, and a love like Kitty and Constance's can be lived with the curtains open and the plan of the house showing every room. The fog took nearly 2 centuries to burn off, and it burned off because people stood up in it, one at a time, and said their own names, and every one of them was doing a thing no Victorian could do, which is to be seen on purpose. And if some part of tonight felt strangely restful to you, the letters, the fireside, the world of two, that is allowed too. The secret was never the sweet part. The sweet part was the Tuesdays, and the Tuesdays at least were always real. So let the house settle now. The fire in Kitty's front bedroom has burned down to a deep orange murmur. The lamplighter has finished the square, and the last post of the day has come and gone with nothing in it that cannot wait. The letters are in their drawer and the key is on its ribbon. The diaries are safe inside the wall. Dreaming in Greek, and all over the sleeping city the devoted friends of London are saying good night at doorsteps and windows, unremarked, unrecorded, and unafraid. Nobody is watching you either, my dear. Not tonight. Not ever again in that old way. And the quiet around you is not the fog. It is only the ordinary kind. Darkness of a century that finally knows your name and likes it. Let your jaw go loose. Let your hands unclench. The door is locked from the inside this time, and the key is yours, and there is nowhere at all you are expected to be. Good night.